And our second speaker today, Tom Bridge, will be presenting on the Three Paragons of IT, how Chidi, Ted, and Jules helped me master IT management. So without further ado, here's Tom.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for the awesome opportunity to talk here at Penn State. This is my absolute favorite conference, and it's a thrill to be presenting this year here from Washington, D.C., and hopefully I look forward to seeing you all next summer as we're back in session at Penn State. So let me go ahead and share my lovely screen. All right, fantastic. So you should hopefully see some slides here. God willing and the creek don't rise. Rusty, stop me if those slides are gone. Looks good. Bueno. All right, here we go. So yes, my talk today is called The Three Paragons of IT, how Chidi, Ted, and Jules helped me master IT management. And so first, I'm Tom Bridge. You may know my voice from the MacAdmins podcast, but I'm also the principal product manager for Apple Technologies at JumpCloud. We make remote work happen. This isn't a talk about JumpCloud and how it can help you do everything you need to accomplish your IT management goals in small to medium enterprises, though you didn't come here for that. So let's get to today's talk instead. What's IT management? IT management is the art and practice of keeping systems, people, and networks working together, aligned on a common set of goals for the accomplishment of a task. Now, sometimes that task is a business process task, like making a living, or making sure that the company makes payroll, and a whole bunch of things like that, or making people a bunch of money. Sometimes the task is more focused on philanthropic goals. No matter what it is, though, the task is pretty clear. Keep the computer systems and their attendant functions and security focuses working together to accomplish that mission. That requires decision making. It requires enabling the people who interact with these systems to have a good understanding of what the business does and needs to do, and a good understanding of the security and data model management. Not to mention, it requires managing devices and networks based on all of that information. More importantly, though, IT management involves managing human beings who use all of those things to accomplish these goals. So let's also talk about what a paragon is. A paragon, if you ask Merriam-Webster, and I don't mess around with dictionaries that are on Twitter, so this is their definition. It's a person or thing regarded as a perfect example of a particular quality. And paragons are examples, generally, of a specific vice or virtue. We could say that John Muir was a paragon of environmentalism and conservation for all of his work advocating for the national parks here in the United States, for example. We could say that Grace Hopper was a paragon of technical leadership and innovation around her work on the first compilers for computers. We could say that Miles Davis was a paragon of jazz music. These aren't complicated or complex or difficult opinions, but they're ways of marking down who we're paying attention to and why. Paragons are helpful because they show us examples of dedication to craft, to focus, to topics that matter to us, and give us examples that we can emulate. They're not perfect people. They're not saints, but they do have qualities that we all want to see more of in our lives. And that's why we're here to talk about today. And we'll see if I can actually make this go. Come on, deck, do the thing. Huh. Why is it making that sound? There we go. Chidi, Ted, and Jules. So we're here to talk about three unlikely paragons of IT management. That's Chidi Anagonye, a fictional philosophy professor, Ted Lasso, a fictional football coach of both kinds, American and British, and Jules Winfield, a fictional hitman turned nomad. This talk is about three works of fiction. And while we're going to talk about the shows and the movie, I'm not going to spoil much of the plot. The Good Place and Ted Lasso aren't really shows that can be spoiled, though. They're about the journey regardless and about the people on it. I'm not going to assume that you have seen the shows or the movie, although they certainly represent cultural touchstones that you probably should have participated in at some point. And it's not too late. Apple TV Plus has Ted Lasso. The Good Place can be found in the iTunes store currently. And of course, you can find Pulp Fiction whenever fine movies are shown. We're going to start today's talk talking about Chidi Anagonye, who is the patron saint of indecision and churn. William Jackson Harper's portrayal of Chidi Anagonye on the NBC sitcom about the afterlife called The Good Place, which ran from 2016 to 2020. And that's where we're going to start our conversation. This talk actually began its life as something shorter, which was an examination of utilitarianism as described by Chidi, called What Do We Owe to One Another, as a way of examining how IT decisions affect our coworkers, how they interact with each other, and what that means for our own decision-making processes. That talk is probably one I'll still write at some point, but I wanted to talk about the higher level world we live in first. But to start, we have to talk about the essential nature of The Good Place, which is a hilarious exploration of human morality and how we can all grow to be better people. But the question is, what do we have to learn from Chidi? And the first place I'm going to start is with analysis paralysis, which is the curse of IT departments everywhere. Well, actually, that's not quite right. It's actually the curse of businesses everywhere. The concept of analysis paralysis is probably one of our most human features. We love to look at things and propose solutions and then think about them over and 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 over again. We game things out, we review possible outcomes, but since time is, at least in the eyes of this reality we share, linear, we can't know ahead of time what'll work and what won't. And so essentially, a lot of organizations spend time getting stuck in a multi-tiered analysis loop, where you spend all of your effort weighing efforts and costs and can't come to effective conclusions. And that means that you're not making decisions for your organization. Avoiding analysis paralysis isn't an easy task. And sometimes you're going to have to make imperfect decisions, even when they're important. So, who here has sat on the precipice of a big decision for far, 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 far too long as they calculated yet another set of figures or done another risk analysis or looked at another needs assessment for just one more hour before you can decide? I certainly don't know of anyone who has their whole career only been faced with easy decisions. I certainly know that, in the poker player's heart that I have, I keep hoping for easy decisions, but they never seem to present themselves. If these decisions were easy, anyone could do this job. And I will say that as I've gained experience and as I've gained perspective through the 20 years that I've spent in IT, these decisions have gotten easier and easier, but they're still nerve-wracking. But you don't have to live in nervous fear of executive action. Avoiding analysis paralysis has 3 keys. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And what do I mean by that? In the search for perfect solutions and execution of perfect solutions, you may pass by good ideas which can be implemented as part of a plan of action. And so a lot of organizations will spend a lot of time basically defining the entirety of their requirements and not introducing a change until all of the requirements have been met. Chances are your organization could benefit from some of those decisions being made quickly and rapidly and implemented before the rest of the harder decisions have had to be made. It is okay to learn and iterate from that process and to go through processes and make mistakes and iterate and then make more mistakes and then make it all better as a process. IT is not a product. It is a process. It's the process of delivering incremental improvements to your organization over a period of time to make the environment better for the end users. So how do we get out of that cycle where we have to think about all of the requirements and implement the solution only when requirements are being met? Some organizations choose to think of this as an agile methodology. They go out and they spend a lot of time learning about Scrum or learning about other tools like that. Generally speaking, the more prescriptive a framework is, the less likely it is to be effective for your organization. What you have to be instead is flexible. And so as a result, if you are trying to avoid the perfect being the enemy of the good, focus on incremental progress instead. Secondly, it's important to make decisions and not just hold things out forever and ever and ever. Now, I do think it's important that we talk about making decisions in a sane and impactful way, wherein you are spending time with your individual contributors inside your organization, the stakeholders in departments other than in IT, to make sure that everybody's on board with the process that you've taken here. And making decisions, even imperfect ones, are going to allow you to progress towards a larger goal. One of the lines that sticks out to me from Chidi over the years was that he talked about being so indecisive that he once thought about renting socks. And I laughed my butt off the first time I heard that line. I was just like, oh man. And then I started to think about what's it like to rent socks? What's that even like? You can't even decide on just like, you know, plaid versus argyle or white athletic socks versus dress socks and all of those things. You wanted to rent that decision. Renting socks is the corporate equivalent of making short-term decisions only to make short-term decisions that have little cost. If your organization is only focused on the tactical response to a given moment, you may not be making good decisions for your organization, and you may be contributing back to a cycle of analysis paralysis. And so as a result, think about IT as a product and think of it as a process. You can't think of IT as a deliverable that you do just once, because it's never like that. IT is a constantly changing and growing process. If we look at things like Apple's release cycle, which is annual, major features come out, you know, in this space here between July and October every year. And if we were still planning for the system that we had thought about designing 2.5 years ago, we would be missing so much in our IT environments. So as an organization, you have to be nimble and you have to make decisions, even imperfect ones, to continue this process. When we think about policy goals, and your IT policies need to be grounded in your outcomes, not just for the organization's outcomes, but for the people that are subject to them. If you're not thinking about your IT policies in such a way that, you know, if all of your user stories around your IT policies start with as an organization, instead of as an employee of this company or as a stakeholder in this department of this company, you are probably not doing the most good for the most number of people. What you owe your organization is good security and operation. And what you owe your people is a phenomenal experience working with their technology. They do not have to be conflicting goals. One of the most valuable questions that I've learned to ask in IT is, what are you trying to accomplish? And it ought to be a question that you have for your security and your audit teams, as well as for your workplace experience teams, as well as for the people team that, you know, actually does the hiring and the onboarding of your staff. Even if all of those things are a very small number of people inside your organization, asking the question, what are you trying to accomplish to these people, and getting to a point where it's not just, you know, language like, you know, hey, we have a security standard that we have to uphold. No, the question is, I want to have a secure environment for my employees so that they are safe from prying eyes and that they can work securely without being compromised. These are the kind of statements that allow you to do the most good for the most people, because they give you a clear understanding of what the task is, not necessarily a clear understanding of the method by which IT must accomplish this goal. You're not going to win every argument as you have these conversations with your coworkers. Some organizations care more about their policy suites and their audit teams than they do about their user experience and their technology's ability to engage with their workforce. Some organizations do not and will not care about these things. Fortunately for you, there's functionally 0% unemployment in IT right now, and maybe find yourself an org that does care about these things. If you can't do the most good for the most number of people because you're being hamstrung by artificial policies that don't necessarily represent good user experience as part of that process. If this is how you feel trying to deal with the very basics of IT at your org, I feel for you, but it doesn't have to be this way. And so essentially, if you spend your time getting close, saying, I have never been more stressed out in my entire life, chances are something needs to change if this is more than just a temporary moment in time. So how do we actually evaluate policies like this? You could choose to use moral philosophy frameworks to write IT policies. That may sound like a confusing choice, but the reality of our modern moment is that if we are not considering moral philosophy when we're evaluating our policy choices, chances are we may be handing away the keys to the kingdom to people who may not have good reason to use them. One of the most important things an IT department can do is to have a set of key principles that they stand for. And building into that process, conversations like, what does IT owe security? IT owes security same defaults on user workstations. They offer rapid response in the event of security incidents. They offer visibility into user data as well as user experience. what does IT owe the people team? You owe the people team a rapid onboarding process that is, shall we say, technologically variable in terms of the end user's abilities. Not everyone who gets hired into your organization is going to work in the engineering department. Some may work for security, some may work for human resources, some may work in sales, some may work in operations, some may work in policy and in the executive teams of an organization. Not all of these teams are expected to have the same level of experience with computers and with technology. Understanding that your organization is responsible for providing useful technology to your employees, it really matters what you hand them in terms of their computer on their very first day. It's also important to ask yourself, what does IT owe to its coworkers? And by that, I mean your fellow rank and file members of the company, not just execs, not just salespeople, not just people in your own department, but everyone inside the company. What are the things that you owe to those people? These are things that your organization is probably going to have to figure out for themselves. I think it's really important that every IT department have a statement of principles, because unless people know where you stand, they're not necessarily going to be able to trust what you're doing. How many people have ever had that conversation with someone when you're doing a remote screen sharing session and they say things like, wow, that's really creepy that you can do that? Well, it is a little bit creepy that you can do that. One need only look at how Apple has implemented the privacy preferences policy control section of macOS to see why Apple themselves have said we have to have a principle that says we will not automatically allow for screen sharing and camera use inside a given application at an admin's behest, that these are things that could potentially be abused. And so it's important as an organization that you have a statement of principles and a code of ethics to go along with this. So, I mean, in terms of what that's going to look like for your organization, I'm going to say, don't look at me. I'm just the idea guy. I'm here to tell you that you need one. I'm not here to necessarily tell you how to write it. I'm going to tell you, however, that there are other organizations that have good codes of ethics that you can beg, borrow, and steal from. The Association of Computing Machinery has a really excellent code of ethics, as does the Harvard IT department, as does the IEEE. And I'll make sure that these links are posted in the talk resources after this talk is complete today. All of these codes of ethics allow you the ability as an IT department to make measured responses so that essentially you can point to someone and say, these are the things that we will do on behalf of the organizations. And more importantly, these are the things that we will not do. We will not snoop around inside user computers. We will not snoop around inside coworkers' emails without reason from the legal department and without supervision and process here. IT is a very key participator in a lot of company security. And so as a result, your coworkers need to trust that you are using that responsibility correctly. Having a code of ethics that you can point them to clearly and succinctly that says, this is what we are capable of, this is what we do, this is how we approach these operations, and this is how we document these kind of things. User privacy, coworker privacy matters. Let's respect that. I think it's also really, really important to avoid circuitous decisions, because if you're making the same decision over and over and over and over again, it's really never the same decision twice. It's different every time. But if you're having to make it on a regular basis, why are you having to rethink this moment? Why is this not something that can be essentially reflected in official policy? Why is this not something that you were spending time as an organization building rubrics to decide for you? And so essentially having these kind of circuitous decisions gets to be a real challenge. Now, some of these circumstances, it's important to realize that I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I don't think this can be solved with a book. So this is where we get into challenges. The fifth major pillar of how Chidi can help us talk about IT principles is the darkest moment of this talk, but it's also the most important moment of this talk. You cannot become a nihilist in IT. Believing in nothing is no way to go through IT, my friend. In the show's third season, after the four main characters from the show are dropped back on Earth to see if they can be reformed, they're accidentally exposed to all of the details on how the afterlife works. Eleanor tries to do this, to do good through works. Jason and Tahani try to do good through donation and philanthropy, and Chidi just breaks. He goes to class with a giant pot of chili mixed with Peeps and M&Ms and gives an incredibly broken lecture to his bewildered students. And he says, now, over the last 2,500 years, Western philosophers have formed three main theories on how to live an ethical life. Now, first off, there's virtue ethics. Aristotle believed that there were certain virtues of mind and character, like courage or generosity, and you should try to develop yourself in accordance with those virtues. Next, there's consequentialism. The basis for judgment about whether something is right or wrong stems from the consequences of that action. How much utility or good did it accomplish versus how much pain or bad? And finally, there's deontology, the school of thought that there are strict rules and duties that everyone must adhere to in a functioning society. Being ethical is simply identifying and obeying those duties and following those rules. But here's the thing, my little chili babies. All three of those theories are hot, stinky cat dookie. The true meaning of life, the actual ethical system that you should all follow, is nihilism. The world is empty. There is no point to anything, and you're just gonna die. So do whatever. That's a problem, because it absolves the individual actor from any personal or societal responsibilities for their actions. Now, here's the thing. Chidi's mad descent into pessimistic nihilism isn't a good interpretation of Nietzsche. And I suspect that Harper's portrayal of that moment, of Chidi's despair, has more to do with the despair that perhaps Nietzsche might be right than about paraphrasing of the work that gave us the aphorism, God is dead. Because here's the thing, my little chili babies. Nihilism is, in fact, the moral philosophy of the moment. If that is the case, we're all in a lot of trouble in IT. So, avoiding nihilism is about participating in the culture of our environment and having responsibilities to each other that come down on us to execute. And here's the thing about this first one. I know that avoiding burnout is one of those things I hate having to put in writing, because it might as well say things like solve world hunger or prevent all hacks. But let's think of this as a shorthand for a reminder that it's good to take breaks, that it's good to recalibrate your expectations, to stop answering immediate tickets, and to do the longer work of planning your IT organization's need for the future. Secondarily, it's really important to have frameworks for how to respond to complex requests. Complex requests are the sort of things that can burn you out without realizing it. It sounds like a simple question. Hey, can we switch MDMs? Or are we ready for a SOC 2 audit? And then suddenly you're faced with a 9-month process to do what sounded like a very simple task. If the question can be asked in 15 seconds, and you realize that you can just see the Gantt chart exploding in front of your vision, having a framework to respond to complex requests like this over a longer period will make it seem more manageable and allow you to prioritize and break down the task into its component parts, which will seem more accomplishable and definitely are more measurable for your organization. Third, and this is the one you're going to have to fight for, you have to staff appropriately. If you think about how you do data handling for your critical data, you should be following the 3-2-1 rule for backup. 3 copies across 2 media types with 1 off-site. This is very much the sort of relationship you need with key personnel, like IT. People take vacations, they get sick, they have babies, they have emergencies. Businesses need to have coverage for these kinds of things, and that's businesses of all sizes. Whether you're 2 or 2,000, you need to have a plan. If you have critical functions in your organization, redundancy is key, and you run the risk of having someone win the lottery and never come back, taking all your processes with them to Tahiti forever. And they're not going to answer your phone call when you try and call them in Tahiti, because again, it's 14 hours time difference. They're not going to pick up the phone. If they burn out and you have no one left behind, is that a good use of their money? It's probably not. So essentially, you're going to need to be prepared as an organization to staff appropriately and to resource your team appropriately. Lastly, you're going to want to be able to explain your IT policies and how they affect your coworkers. Or you're going to have to be able to redirect those inquiries to people who can. And sometimes it's easy to say, not my jurisdiction, not my process, not my problem, hand it off. But it's more important that your organization be able to explain why they do things the way that they do without having to resort to the old aphorism that all of us dads know, which is because I said so. Because I said so is not a great way to go through life, especially in IT policy. So having a good set of explanations on why you do the things that you do will help you avoid this nihilistic cant towards IT management. We'll see if I can move my slides. My computer has slowed to a crawl. I'm sorry, everybody. What's going on?
Perhaps it's decided to give up.
You know, I've certainly had that day before where my machine has given up. And I hope that today is not that day because I'm really in the middle of this talk and I'm kind of feeling it. Here we go. Let's see. Maybe I can click next. Search me right for using Google Slides for this. A poor craftsman blames his tools. All right, here we go. So, summing up what Chidi represents to IT. You have to consider the morality of the moment when you're making IT decisions. You have to consider who is this best for, why is this important to my organization, and how does this affect the bottom line of my organization and my department within that organization. You also have to consider the consequences of policy choices, and you can't get stuck in a loop. Lastly, it's so important for you not to become a nihilist as you look at all of this. Nihilism is a crutch, and it's going to be difficult to get back out of, and it has consequences to your organization. Lastly, indecision has costs also, and renting sucks is no way to go through life. So I've been having this lump in my throat for the last couple of weeks in preparation for this talk. It's this fear and confusion of how I got to be here in front of a large audience. That's sadly normal. It's okay to wonder if you're supposed to be on the stage talking about, of all things, how pop culture relates to a highly technical field like the one that we're in. So let's take a second to address imposter syndrome in IT operations culture. And here's the thing, folks. This one's really, 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 really important today. You're not an imposter. An imposter wouldn't be here right now. One of the central challenges of life is how it changes and expands. And that's been true of IT my entire career. The problems don't stay the same. They change as the world changes. It turns out that life isn't a puzzle that can just be solved one time and it's done. You wake up every day and you solve it again. You're you, and that's okay. Do your best, show your work, learn, grow, expand. Focus your time and attention on being the better you. And so that takes us to Ted Lasso, patron saint of empathy and leadership. We're here to talk about Ted today as well. For those who haven't seen the hit workplace comedy about an American football coach who moves to England to coach football of a different sort in the Premier League. It's on Apple TV Plus, and I'll say this for anyone in the audience today. If you sign up for Apple TV Plus and hate Ted Lasso, I'll send you a $10 Apple gift card. I've been saying this for almost a year now. No one has taken me up on this. So you got to tell me that you hate Ted Lasso, and then I'll send you $10. Ted's strength as a fish out of water, an American football coach suddenly coaching in the English Premier League, is primarily in the way that he works with people. While I would argue that in order to be a successful IT department, you absolutely need to understand how IT operates, that doesn't have to be your primary skill. It may be just fine that you're not a coder or you've never built an app or architected a microservice. What you have to be is honest about what you know and what you don't. So often we're afraid of admitting that we don't know something. Ignorance is obviously a vice and not a virtue. And I'm certainly not saying that ignorance is a virtue, but it is the first step the first step to knowing something is admitting that you don't know it. Authenticity is being honest and true in your dealings. So leading from an honest moment means saying what you mean and meaning what you say. It also means that you need to listen as much as you talk. And that means within your department and within your company. As you work with your coworkers, you need to be just as focused on taking their information and their input into your heart and listening to it and evaluating it against your own goals and needs and the goals and needs of your organization. It's really, really important. Ted also tells us that you need to listen to everyone that you can, even those that aren't necessarily talking in public. One of the most heartwarming stories of the entire first season arc is the arc of Nathan Shelley, the kit man, who they discover has learned more and forgotten more about soccer than any of them. Lastly, it's important to start conversations just to have them, not just within your department, but outside of your organization. Talking to people and making connections within your organization absolutely is critical to the success of your department. And that's true for every department within the organization. Sales needs to talk to engineering. Engineering needs to talk to operations. Operations needs to have a functional understanding of pretty much what everybody else is doing. Having those conversations means starting those conversations on your own just to have them. It ain't always easy to have these conversations. And it's putting yourself out there in a way that your organization may not be used to. And having those conversations to understand what people's needs and wants are in the field is absolutely critical to the environment. This next one is a personal pet peeve, and it has to do with the way in which you talk about your coworkers. They're not users, they're your coworkers. You work with people. Treat them like people, please. How you talk about people matters. How you think about them matters too. Part of being on a team is working with mutual respect and assuming positive intent. Ted teaches that being accountable to one another, to treat each other with respect, is a value that can't be bought or traded. How people see you as a department, as a resource, often determines how you are valued within the organizations. Do you move mountains? Do you treat people well? You're a trusted partner. Are you cold and standoffish? Are you restrictive without explanation? You're a liability and you will be avoided and cut out of decisions. Your users will actively circumvent IT because our people, our coworkers, are a lot like water. They're here to move in the direction that is most productive to them. And so as a result, this comes back to how you see your coworkers and how you talk about them inside your mind, as well as in your words and in your communications. Think about people like they're your coworkers, not like they're your users. In this scene, superstar Jamie Tart, the primary forward for AFC Richmond, comes in after a fight with Coach Ted Lasso and says he can't practice. Ted, of course, being the coach that he is, deals with this situation without resorting to threats or yelling. He talks authentically about why practice matters. It's the only time just the 11 of them are on the field together, fully under their own control. And he deals with that situation. Now, Jamie still skips practice, but he never skips another event for the organization. So, if you've seen anything about this show, you know that there's the sign that sits above Ted's office, and it says "Believe." And the show teaches us it's not just enough to believe in yourself. You have to believe in others as well. And you have to believe in the work that you're doing. If you can't believe in others, if you can't believe in the work that you're doing, if you can't believe in yourself, you're not doing your authentic best in your organization. And while it can be challenging to believe in others who sometimes let you down, or the work, which may not always be authentic and satisfying, if you do not believe in these things, those other things will never get better. So it's important to go there and believe. Lastly, it's important, or not lastly, rather. Next, it's important to be open but accountable. IT is a lot like improv, where you have to accept the premise of the sketch and say yes, and this other detail, or no, but, and essentially provide alternatives. So IT is an awful lot like that. When someone asks you, hey, can I do this crazy idea that's probably not all that great of an idea? You can say, yes, you can do that. And then I'm going to need you to talk to the office counsel about that one before you do it. Or you can say, no, you can't do that, but you can do this other thing that may accomplish the same goal. And so it's important for you to be open as a department to solutions that did not come from inside, and also accountable when those decisions aren't necessarily up to you to implement. So essentially, as a part of this, you are responsible for the technology of your organization, but you're also responsible for how it's used. And so having those conversations with the people that are actually using that technology on a day-to-day basis is really critical to your organization's success. So be open and accountable as part of those things. Lastly, and this one's really important about Ted, Oh, nope, that's not what I was going for. Not exactly that is. What I was going to say is, after a particularly disastrous showing, Coach Lasso talks with his defender here on the left, Sam Obisanya. He's trying to get him to step away from his own frustration with his own performance and says to him, Sam, you know what the happiest animal is? It's a goldfish. And you know why? It's got a 10-second memory. So it's important for you to be a goldfish. It's okay to own your mistakes. They do not define you. You cannot let your mistakes define who you are, or you'll never move past them. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to make decisions that don't play out. What you have to be is willing to let go of the shame of that moment and own what happened. The people who will pillory you for an honest mistake aren't worth your shame and suffering. The people who will help you up, shake off that moment, grow and learn from it, and do better next time absolutely are worth your effort in doing those things, growing, learning, adding skills to your tool set, and moving better, on for the better for the next time. So when it comes to moments of sadness and frustration and crisis where things have gone badly, and maybe moments where you have failed, it is important to remember that when you are done being sad and or angry about them, it's time to move on from that feeling. In those moments, it's important to have a network of support, colleagues, friends, the broader community of MacAdmins, the broader community of your own life to help you through that moment. None of us do this job truly alone and in a vacuum. You wouldn't be here if that were the case. Do not put that entirely on yourself to go through alone. There is something worse out there than being sad, and that is being alone and being sad. So what does Ted Lasso represent to IT? Lead from kindness, be open but be accountable, be a goldfish, believe not just in others but in yourself too. And then last but not least, apologize and accept apologies. The last paragon is probably our most controversial for the day, and that's the hitman of Marcellus Wallace, Jules Winfield from Pulp Fiction, portrayed by Samuel L. Jackson. He's the patron saint of mercy and trying real hard to be the shepherd, Ringo. If you haven't seen Quentin Tarantino's 1994 film Pulp Fiction, understanding this next bit isn't hard. Jules is a hitman who, after a miracle occurs, is no longer interested in a life of violence. He's tested one more time at a coffee shop where he is eating with his former associate, and a robbery occurs. Winfield is unwilling to part with his boss's briefcase and eventually enters into a conversation with the robber. Winfield's transformation, nay, his enlightenment, from instrument of violence to shepherd of the weak against the tyranny of evil men, is something that of a mystery to his partner, who can represent the viewer. Let's look at Jules's transformation and how it can be viewed from the lens of IT. You might recognize this movie moment. You might have had an impulse as an IT professional for your coworker who emailed out credit card data or looked at porn at home on their work computer or some other transgression. You might have had this perfectly natural impulse. And in many cases, there could well be a justification for this response, especially if it created an emergency for you off hours or on vacation. Again, that response is perfectly natural, but we're not here to talk about that response. So let's keep chilling. At the end of Pulp Fiction, as Jules is sitting opposite from the robber he calls Ringo, he waxes rhapsodic about his career of violence. He says, "There's this passage I got memorized, Ezekiel 25:17. The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the iniquities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brothers. And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee." I've been saying that stuff for years, and if you heard it, that meant your ass. I never gave much thought to what it meant. I just thought it was some cold-blooded stuff to say to an MFer before I popped cap in his ass. But I saw some stuff this morning that made me think twice. See, now I'm thinking maybe it means you're the evil man and I'm the righteous man. And Mr. 9mm here, he's the shepherd protecting my righteous ass in the valley of darkness. Or it could mean you're the righteous man and I'm the shepherd and it's the world that's evil and selfish. I'd like that. But that stuff ain't the truth. The truth is, you're the weak, and I'm the tyranny of evil men. But I'm trying, Ringo. I'm trying real hard to be the shepherd. So what does it mean to be the shepherd when it comes to IT? I think what it means is that you need to be comfortable with your policy goals and your methods. Are you protecting your coworkers? Are you protecting them from themselves, from others? Are you comfortable with the way your organization treats its staff? If you're not, now's the time for change. And it's important as the shepherd of the weak to protect them from the tyranny of evil people, some of whom you may work for, or who may, shall we say, aren't dealing with the best angels of their nature. And so it's important as an organization to think about these kind of things and understand that in IT, you're the shepherd, not the tyranny of evil men. So it's important to also know who your escalation path is, who your Winston Wolf is, who solves problems. Stuff is going to go wrong in IT. Stuff is going to go wrong with your organization. It's really important to know who to call. And it's really important that when you call them, if they're outside of your usual command chain, to be polite, be engaged, and be thankful for their efforts in solving your problems. And so as a result, you have to think about these kind of things on a regular basis. It's not the most fun, I'll tell you that for sure. However, if you know who your Winston Wolf is, you know where the problem's going from there. So it's also important for you to recognize that personality goes a long way, and that how you solve how you solve people's IT problems, or how you solve policy problems on the whole, is absolutely related to how you interact with other people. And it's important for information technology as a whole to be a human-centered discipline. And so as a result, recognize that personality goes a long way. So what does Jules represent to IT as we come close to the end of this talk? It's important for you to try hard to be the shepherd. It's important for you to learn from your past mistakes and reform yourself towards a better you. It's also important to know who your Winston Wolf is and what your escalation path is when things take a dark turn. It's also important that you consider your duty to protect your colleagues and your coworkers. Now, last important but not least, being a hardliner seems like it's a cool thing. It's not. So let's just drop the affect. All that said, we've reached the conclusion of our talk today, and we've talked a little bit about how each of the folks that have appeared in our pop culture ethos over the last, in Pulp Fiction's case, nearly 30 years, and in the case of Good Place and Ted Lasso over the last year, we can see that there's this theme and this focus of ethics, and that we need to be focused on what our moral decisions are in information technology and how they affect our day-to-day operations as a company. So with all of that said, I will say, of course, thank you. I will leave us here at this lovely slide while we have some Q&A. And Rusty, take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tom. Really great presentation. We don't currently have any questions, I think, based on the presentation. Well, we have one maybe. Didn't Phil Coulson go to Tahiti?
Phil Coulson did, in fact, go to Tahiti. And he came back. We're not sure if it was, is that still the Phil Coulson that we knew then? I'm not sure.
It's a very tricky time to live in. Another Lasso is fantastic for affirmation.
Oh, excellent. I'm glad.
So,
and the new season starts 2 weeks from tomorrow. So get your Apple TV Plus ready.
Excellent.
That happened to me.
As long as everyone else sees and hears me, okay, that's fine.
It looks like there was a slight issue with Teams because everyone appeared frozen for a split second.
Oh dear.
Yeah, it was Teams.
Kelly says football is life. She'll take her answer off the air. So whenever
Very
you
good
want
to
talk,
know. Yeah, she is also referring to an excellent podcast on the Incomparable Network. I am guesting on the next episode, due out tomorrow, on episode 9 of the first season of Ted Lasso. And I think when it was all said and done, we talked for 3 times the length of the episode about that episode. So, get some snacks. That one's going to be fun. So,
fantastic. Well, someone should have had a Royale with cheese for lunch. That would have been great. I'm in the wrong country for that one, I think. Yeah. So, anything else that you have upcoming, Tom, where we can see you?
Well, of course, there's the MacAdmins podcast, and you can always find us at podcast.macadmins.org or wherever fine podcasts are sold. And we've got some really exciting episodes that I can't quite talk about yet. But trust to say that there is some good stuff bubbling up through the podcast this summer. Yeah, that's pretty great. I'll have the slides up before too long at tombridge.com.
Excellent. Tombridge.com. Tom Bridge himself, thank you very much for the presentation today. We really appreciate you taking the time to deliver a second session